Montana Territory, 1887. In a land where survival demands strength and mercy is as rare as spring flowers in December, fate weaves an unlikely tale of two broken souls. Clara Whitmore arrives from Boston with little more than her damaged leg and shattered dreams, a mail-order bride whose intended husband lies cold in a miner's grave. The townsfolk turn their backs, leaving her to face the brutal Montana winter alone in an abandoned cabin. Miles away, behind the walls of the territory's largest ranch, Silas Cade counts his wealth in cattle and isolation, a man whose heart froze. Long before the first snow, when their paths cross on the coldest night of the year, neither suspects how one moment of desperate necessity will alter the course of their lives forever. Could two wounded hearts, each scarred by a past they'd rather forget, find healing in the most unlikely of places? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Northern Pacific Railway ticket trembled in Clara Whitmore's gloved hand as the train hissed to a stop at Silver Creek Station. Third-class passage from Boston to Montana Territory, her last 3 months' savings as a music teacher reduced to a rectangular scrap of paper. She tucked it into her reticule, where Benjamin Crawford's letters already rested, their hopeful words now rendered hollow by fate's cruel hand. Through the frosted window, Montana's October sky stretched vast and grey, so different from Boston's familiar crowded horizons. Clara smoothed her dark traveling dress, fingers lingering over the thick fabric that concealed her damaged leg. The accident that had taken her music career had left her with more than just a limp. It had stripped away her future in proper society, leading her here to this wild territory and a marriage arrangement with a man she'd never met. Last stop, Silver Creek, the conductor's voice carried through the passenger car. Clara gathered her courage along with her carpetbag, the familiar ache in her leg intensifying as she gripped the seat back for support. She had practiced this moment countless times in her mind, how to navigate the narrow aisle, descend the steep steps, make her way across the platform without drawing attention to her halting gait. The station master barely glanced up from his ledger as Clara approached his desk. "I'm here to meet Benjamin Crawford," she announced, working to keep her voice steady. "He was to escort me to his property near Ben Crawford's dead." The words fell like stones in still water. "Mining accident 3 weeks past. Thought someone would have telegraphed you." Clara's carpetbag slipped from nerveless fingers. "There must be some mistake. I received his letter just last month confirming the arrangements." "No mistake, ma'am." He finally looked up, his expression a mixture of pity and irritation. "Cave in at the Silver Bell mine. Took 5 men. Crawford was one of them." The carefully constructed future Clara had built in her mind began to crumble. "I see." She didn't see at all. "Perhaps you could direct me to his property. I have the deed address." "Listen, miss." The station master's voice softened marginally. "Crawford's cabin's 10 miles out. Rough country. Winter's coming early this year. Best thing for you would be to take the next train back east." Clara's fingers found the worn edge of Benjamin's last letter in her reticule. His words had painted such a promising picture: a small but solid cabin, good grazing land, plans for a vegetable garden come spring, a fresh start for a woman society had deemed damaged goods. "I appreciate your concern," she said carefully, "but I've sold everything to come here. There is no going back." "Then try the boarding house in town. Mrs. Whitaker sometimes takes in working women." His emphasis on working made Clara's cheeks burn. "Though with your—" His eyes flickered to her leg. "Well, opportunities are limited out here." Clara straightened her spine, ignoring the protest from her hip. "Mr. Crawford's property. The directions, please." He sighed, scratching out rough directions on a scrap of paper. "Your funeral, miss? Winter's no joke in Montana Territory, especially alone." The word "alone" echoed in Clara's mind as she made her way down the station steps, each careful movement a reminder of why she had come so far. Boston had been full of people, Yet she had never felt more alone than among its proper society after the accident. At least here, in this raw territory, she might forge a life on her own terms. She paused at the bottom of the steps, taking in the dusty main street of Silver Creek. False-fronted buildings lined both sides, their weather-beaten signs advertising the usual frontier businesses: general store, assay office, saloon. A few townspeople hurried past, collars turned. Up against the bitter wind that swept down from the snow-touched mountains looming to the north, no one met her eye. No one offered assistance. Clara shifted her carpet bag to her stronger side and took her first step into Silver Creek proper, her uneven gait marking her as clearly as a brand. Behind her, the train whistle sounded, a long, mournful cry that seemed to carry with it the last fragments of her old life. She didn't turn to watch it leave. Ahead lay Benjamin Crawford's cabin, and whatever future she could salvage from these unexpected circumstances. Clara Whitmore had not come to Montana Territory seeking charity or pity. She had come seeking a chance, and even if that chance now looked different than she had imagined, she would face it standing on her own 2 feet, however unsteady they might be. The cabin materialized out of the gathering dusk like a charcoal sketch coming into focus. Clara stood at the edge of the clearing, her hired wagon driver already turning his team around, eager to return to town before full dark. The crunch of wagon wheels faded into the stillness, leaving her alone with the hollow-eyed structure that was to have been her marital home. Benjamin Crawford had described a modest but sturdy dwelling. The reality before her was indeed modest. A single-room cabin with a stone chimney, its raw timber walls silvered by sun and wind. A half-finished fence traced 3 sides of a would-be garden, the posts listing like drunken soldiers. The tin roof gleamed dully in the fading light, and beneath it, a small covered porch offered the cabin's only concession to comfort. Clara's leg burned from the jarring wagon ride as she made her way to the door. The key had been exactly where the station master said it would be, tucked behind a loose chinking near the frame. It turned with resistance in the lock, the door groaning open on leather hinges. The musty darkness inside held its breath. Clara fumbled with her matches, finding a half-burned candle on the rough-hewn table. Light bloomed, pushing back the shadows to reveal the cabin's sparse contents. A narrow bed against one wall, a pot-bellied stove, a few shelves holding basic provisions, everything layered with the soft dust of abandonment. She sank onto a straight-backed chair, her carpet-bag at her feet. The flame's glow caught something on the table, a leather-bound book, its pages rippled from moisture. Clara drew it closer, recognizing it as a journal. Benjamin Crawford's journal, by the name inscribed on the first page. October 1st, 1887. The silver vein in the new shaft looks promising. Johnson says we could hit a real strike by month's end. Bought extra timber for shoring. Better safe than sorry. Posted the last letter to Miss Whitmore today. She seems a sensible woman, despite her condition. Reckon we can make a go of it, even if she ain't what most would call proper wife material. Better a broken leg than a broken mind, my ma always said. Clara's fingers tightened on the leather binding. So that's how he had seen her. Damaged goods, but acceptable given his circumstances. She should have expected no more from a man willing to marry a stranger. October 12th, 1887. Shafts showing signs of stress. More creaking than I like. Told the foreman, but he says the new timbers'll hold. Can't afford to stop work now, not with a wife coming. Need to finish the garden fence, lay in supplies for winter. Miss Whitmore writes she's handy with a needle. Maybe she can make curtains for the windows. Place needs a woman's touch. The next entry was in a different hand, dated October 15th. Ben Crawford and 4 others lost in cave-in at Silver Bell. Mine. Bodies recovered. Effects held at assay office. May God rest their souls. Clara closed the journal, her throat tight. Benjamin Crawford had died, trying to make this place ready for her arrival. The reality of her situation pressed in with the gathering darkness. A crippled woman alone in a half-finished home, winter breathing down the mountains, and not a friend for miles. The accident that had crushed her leg 2 years ago flashed through her memory, the crack of splintering wood as the piano movers lost their grip on the grand staircase, the instrument's deadly weight pinning her against the marble steps. The doctors had called it a miracle she could walk at all. Society called it a tragedy that ended her teaching career at Boston's finest girls' school. Now here she sat, hundreds of miles from everything familiar, her future once again altered by fate's heavy hand. Outside, wind sighed through pine boughs, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, a lonely sound that raised the hair on Clara's neck. The candle guttered, reminding her of practical concerns. She needed to check the provisions, ensure she had enough lamp oil and firewood. The station master's words echoed in her mind. Winter's no joke in Montana territory. Clara rose carefully, testing her leg. The journey had left it stiffer than usual, but she forced herself to move, to take stock of her new domain. Benjamin Crawford had died, preparing this place for a future that would never come. She owed it to him and to herself to at least try to survive here. The journal remained on the table, its pages holding the last thoughts of a man she would never meet. Clara straightened her shoulders. She hadn't come west seeking romance, or even companionship, not really. She had come seeking independence, a place where her worth wouldn't be measured by her limitations. Perhaps in this regard, at least, fate had done her an unexpected kindness. Clara's fingers traced the worn edges of her sheet music, Chopin's nocturnes bound in faded blue leather. The pages held more than notes. They contained memories of concert halls and student recitals, of respectability and purpose. Now, like her, they seemed out of place in this rough-hewn world. Piano lessons. Mrs. Henderson, the general store owner's wife, repeated the words as if Clara had suggested teaching flying. Well, I don't know about that. Her eyes darted to Clara's cane, then away. Most folks here are more concerned with keeping food on the table than fancy music. Music education was once considered essential for any well-bred child, Clara pressed, fighting to keep her voice steady. Her dwindling supplies had driven her into town, but she'd hoped to secure more than just flour and salt. I taught at the Brighton School for Young Ladies in Boston. This ain't Boston. Mrs. Henderson's tone held a finality that brooked no argument. Though if you're looking for work, the laundry might. Thank you, but no. Clara tucked the sheet music back into her bag. Even if her leg could withstand hours of standing over steaming washtubs, she wouldn't give the townspeople the satisfaction of seeing her reduced to that. The first frost had come the night before, silvering the cabin's windows and stiffening Clara's injured leg until every step felt like walking on shattered glass. Winter whispered its approach in every bitter wind, and her woodpile looked pitiful against the threats to come. Outside the store, a group of children played hopscotch in the dirt. One girl, perhaps 10, watched Clara with undisguised curiosity. "Ma says you came from Boston," she ventured as Clara passed. "Is it true you used to play piano in fancy houses?" Clara paused, shifting her weight to her good leg. "I did. I taught piano too. I always wanted to learn." The girl scuffed her worn boot in the dirt. "Pa's got an old harmonium in our parlor, but nobody knows how to play it proper." "Sarah Jane!" A sharp voice cut through the air. The girl's mother hurried forward, gripping her daughter's arm. "What have I told you about talking to strangers?" She pulled the child away, shooting Clara a look that mixed suspicion with something like fear, as if misfortune might be catching. Clara continued her halting progress down the boardwalk, each step measured and careful. The general store's bell chimed behind her as new customers entered. She heard their murmured greetings, the comfortable sounds of belonging that seemed to fade whenever she appeared. Back in her cabin, Clara laid out her meager purchases. The supplies would last 2 weeks if she was careful. The money wouldn't last much longer. She had hoped to establish herself as the town's music teacher, a respectable position that would allow her to maintain some vestige of her former life. But the townspeople's reactions had made it clear. They saw only her disability, not her capabilities. The sheet music sat on her small table beside Benjamin Crawford's journal, two relics of lives that no longer existed. Clara opened the Chopin, humming softly as her fingers moved through the familiar patterns. No piano here to give voice to the notes, but the music lived in her memory, in muscles trained through thousands of hours of practice. A sharp gust rattled the cabin's windows. The evening wind had teeth now, and the nights grew longer with each passing day. Clara had managed to split enough wood for the next few days, though each swing of the axe sent shocks of pain through her hip. She was learning new skills, finding ways to adapt each task to work around her limitations. But would it be enough? The harmonium in Sarah Jane's house haunted her thoughts. One student might lead to others, if only she could prove herself. But first, she had to survive the coming winter and the solitude that pressed in harder than the cold. Clara closed the sheet music and turned to more immediate concerns. The cabin needed weatherproofing, the garden needed clearing before snow flew, and her food stores needed careful rationing. She couldn't play piano anymore, but perhaps she could learn to play this new life's harsher music, a symphony of survival composed in minor keys. As darkness crept in, she lit her lamp, its small flame a defiant warmth against the gathering night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to fail or persevere. For now, she had shelter, supplies, and her own stubborn will. It would have to be enough. The broken sea brand stood out stark against the heifer's flank, steam rising from the fresh mark into the crisp morning air. Silas Cade watched from atop his black stallion as his men moved through the herd with practiced efficiency. The brand was his own design, a sea with a lightning bolt cracked through its center. Some said it represented the break with his family back east. Others whispered it stood for his broken heart. Silas let them whisper. "That's the last of them, Mr. Cade." His foreman, Matthews, pulled up alongside. 300 head, all branded, and ready for winter pasture. Silas nodded, his scarred hand tight on the reins. From this ridge, he could see most of his 20,000 acres, the largest spread in Montana territory. Rolling grassland stretched toward distant mountains, broken only by the silver ribbon of Crystal Creek and the massive barn complex that served as the heart of his operation. No neighbor's smoke marred his horizon, just the way he preferred. "It's storms coming," he said, noting the heavy clouds building over the peaks. "Get the men in," and the stock moved to the sheltered valleys. Matthews hesitated. "Town's having their harvest social tonight. Boys were hoping their choice." Silas's voice carried the same flat finality that had built his empire. "They can ride into town or keep their jobs. Can't stop a blizzard with a fiddle tune." The foreman knew better than to argue. In the decade since Silas Cade had claimed this land, he'd never attended a town gathering, never participated in their celebrations or sorrows. His wealth employed half the region, his cattle fed their families, but the man himself remained, as remote as the mountains that crowned his property. Silas waited until Matthews rode off before turning his horse toward home. The massive house rose from the prairie like a fortress, 3 stories of native stone and imported timber built to his exact specifications. No warmth showed in its lines, no comfort in its grandeur. Like its owner, it served its purpose without concession to beauty or sentiment. Inside, his boot heels echoed through empty rooms. A staff of 4 maintained the house, but they knew to remain invisible unless summoned. Silas shed his coat, the movement pulling at the tight scar tissue along his right side. The old injury ached worse in cold weather, a reminder he didn't need of why he'd fled Philadelphia society for this self-imposed exile. His study held the only signs of personal history, military maps from his cavalry days, a collection of surgical texts, and a silver-framed daguerreotype he never looked at but couldn't bring himself to discard. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon, a habit acquired in field hospitals where whiskey served as both antiseptic and anesthetic. The ledger on his desk showed columns of neat figures, each number representing another piece of his carefully constructed isolation, cattle prices, grain futures, equipment costs, all under his direct control. Unlike people, numbers didn't lie or betray. They didn't make promises they couldn't keep or offer love they didn't mean. A knock interrupted his calculations. "Telegram from Chicago, sir." His housekeeper, Mrs. Graves, knew better than to enter without permission. "Seems urgent." Silas took the yellow paper, scanning its terse message. His younger brother James, still trying to breach the walls Silas had built between himself and his former life. Family matters require immediate attention. Mother failing. Please come home. Home. The word sparked no warmth in his chest. Home had died 10 years ago in a Philadelphia drawing room, along with his medical career and his faith in human nature. This vast emptiness was his home now, these endless acres his family. He fed the telegram to the fire, watching the paper curl and blacken. Behind him, the window framed the approaching storm, purple-black clouds roiling over his domain. Some of his hands called him the king of Crystal Creek Valley, but they didn't understand. He wasn't a king. He was a ghost, haunting these lands like the phantom pain in his twisted right hand, present but not truly alive. The bourbon burned going down, but not enough to warm the cold place inside him. Tomorrow, he'd inspect the winter pastures. Review the breeding records, plan next spring's expansion. The same careful routine that had carried him through the last decade. Routine was safe. Routine didn't require trust or risk or feeling. Outside, the wind picked up, driving the first snowflakes against his window. Somewhere in that gathering storm, his men rode for town and their harvest celebrations, seeking light and warmth and human connection. Silas Cade stayed in his stone fortress, surrounded by wealth and solitude, telling himself this was all he needed. He almost believed it. Clara's fingers closed around her mother's locket as another gust rattled the cabin's walls. Inside the silver oval, her parents smiled from their miniature portraits, frozen in a happier time before consumption had taken them both. The precious piece of jewelry was the last thing of value she owned, and soon it might be all that stood. Between her and starvation, the storm had begun 3 days ago, transforming the world into a howling white void. Her woodpile, carefully built over weeks of painful labor, had dwindled faster than she'd anticipated. The temperature kept dropping, and her food stores were down to a handful of potatoes, some dried beans, and half a sack of flour. Just a little. "Longer," she whispered, though whether to herself or her parents' images, she wasn't sure. The words frosted in the air before her. Despite keeping the stove burning, she could see her breath inside the cabin now. A particularly violent gust shook the structure, and something crashed against the roof. Clara started, her bad leg cramping as she rose too quickly. She'd learned to identify the cabin's various groans and creaks over the past weeks, but this sound was new and frightening. Moving to the window, she rubbed a clear spot in the frost. The grey light of late afternoon barely penetrated the swirling snow. The half-finished garden fence had vanished completely under drifts that grew by the hour. Even the path she'd laboriously kept clear to the outhouse was gone, swallowed by the storm's hunger. Her leg throbbed with the cold, the old injury a constant reminder of her vulnerability. She should have swallowed her pride and taken the laundry. Job should have found some way to earn enough for passage back east before winter arrived. But pride had always been her weakness, hadn't it? Pride had made her refuse her aunt's charity after her parents' deaths. Pride had brought her west to marry a stranger rather than live as a burden on society. Now pride might kill her. The locket warmed in her palm as she calculated her chances. The town was 10 miles away, an impossible journey through this weather. Even if her leg had been sound, the nearest neighbor, if she remembered the station master's directions correctly, was the Crystal Creek Ranch, owned by the mysterious Silas Cade. But that lay 5 miles to the north, and no one had seen its Reclusive owner in town for months. A sharp crack from above made her jump. Something was wrong with the roof. The sound came again, followed by a whisper of cold air that shouldn't have been there. Clara grabbed her candle and forced herself up the ladder to the cabin's small loft, each rung an agony for her damaged hip. In the flickering light, she saw it, a small break in the roof boards where the weight of snow had forced them apart. As she watched, another gust drove a powder of snow through the gap. By morning, the opening would be larger. By the next day, Clara descended carefully, her mind racing. She had materials to patch the roof. Benjamin Crawford had left behind plenty of tools and supplies. But with her leg, she couldn't manage the repair from outside, and trying to fix it from within the loft would be nearly impossible in this cold. With her hands already stiff and clumsy, the stove's last log crackled, sending up a shower of sparks. Clara touched the locket again, feeling the weight of her parents' imagined gazes. What would they think, seeing their daughter in such straits? Their accomplished pianist, their pride and joy, reduced to freezing alone in a Montana wilderness? But she wasn't quite alone, was she? The girl, Sarah Jane, had smiled at her, had seen past her limp to the teacher she used to be. Perhaps if she could reach town, the child's family might. The thought died as another blast of wind screamed past the cabin. Even if she managed the journey, the townspeople had made their feelings clear. They'd see her presence as a burden, her need for help, as proof they'd been right about her unfitness for frontier life. Night was falling, the storm's fury undiminished. Clara added her last log to the stove, knowing it wouldn't last until morning. In the darkening cabin, she clutched her mother's locket and faced a brutal truth. She had 24 hours, maybe less, before the cold became deadly. Tomorrow, if the storm hadn't broken, she would have to try for help. Pride wouldn't keep her warm, and she hadn't survived a shattered leg and shattered dreams to die forgotten in a frozen cabin. But tonight, she would endure. She would wrap herself in every blanket she owned, drink melted snow heated on the failing stove, and pray for either the storm's end or the strength to face what morning would bring. Silas recognized death's approach by instinct, a skill honed in war. The old cavalry saber mounted above his study fireplace reminded him daily of the lessons learned on distant battlefields, including the sound of someone fighting their last fight. That same death-rattle wheeze carried through the storm now, stopping him mid-stride as he checked his property's boundary line. Through the curtain of snow, he barely made out Crawford's old cabin, its chimney ominously dark against the white sky. His first impulse was to ride on. Whatever fool had tried to winter in that half-finished structure had made their choice. But that same instinct that had saved his men in battle nagged at him, and he found himself turning his horse toward the cabin. The structure was nearly buried in drifts. No smoke rose from the chimney, and an ominous sag in the roof promised collapse. He dismounted carefully, his scarred hand protesting the cold. "Hello, the cabin!" His voice disappeared into the storm's howl. No answer. The door had frozen shut. Silas threw his weight against it, feeling the ice crack. Inside, the darkness held a deadly chill. "Anyone here?" A sound, fabric moving against fabric, faint but present. His eyes adjusted to the gloom, finding a figure huddled near a cold stove. A woman, wrapped in every blanket the cabin possessed, her face pale as the snow outside. So, the infamous Mr. Cade does exist. Her voice emerged barely above, a whisper, but carried a trace of wry humor that surprised him. "I was beginning to think you were just a local legend." Silas knelt beside her, medical training surfacing through years of disuse. Her skin was too cold, her pulse thready, but her eyes were alert, showing more life than her frozen form suggested. "You're Crawford's widow?" His almost bride. She tried to sit up, and he saw the stiffness in her movements, not just from cold, something else. An old injury. "Clara Whitmore. I arrived after he died. You should have gone back east, so everyone keeps telling me." She attempted to rise and failed, frustration crossing her features. "I don't suppose you've come to deliver a sermon on my poor judgment." Despite himself, Silas felt the ghost of a smile touch his lips. Even half frozen, she had spirit. "No, ma'am. I've come to prevent having to bury another body on my property." He shrugged out of his heavy coat, wrapping it around her shoulders. The motion pulled at his old wounds, but he ignored them. "Can you walk?" Usually, though at present, she gestured to her leg and understanding dawned. The rumors about Crawford's mail-order bride being crippled had reached even his isolated ears. "My horse is outside. It's 3 miles to my house. I can't." "You can and will." He didn't recognize his own voice, softened from its usual commanding tone. "Unless you prefer to die here?" Something flickered in her eyes, pride warring with survival. "You don't understand. My leg. I understand better than you think." He held up his scarred right hand, letting her see the twisted fingers that had ended his surgical career. "We all carry our damages, Mrs. Whitmore. The smart ones learn to accept help when it's offered." She studied him for a long moment. This woman who had tried to carve out a life from Montana's unforgiving wilderness. Her next words came reluctantly, but with a dignity that struck him. "Then I accept your help, Mr. Cade. Though I warn you, I'm not particularly good at being rescued." "I'm not particularly good at rescuing." He gathered her into his arms, feeling how the cold had leached the strength from her body. "We'll manage." Outside, his horse shifted nervously in the strengthening wind. Getting her mounted would be a challenge, but Silas had learned long ago that impossible things became possible when necessity stripped away pride's barriers. "Hold tight," he ordered, settling her before him in the saddle. She smelled of wood smoke and frost and something else, rosewater, incongruous in this savage setting. A touch of gentility surviving against all odds, like the woman herself. "T'yesi." Storm closed around them as they rode, but Silas knew his land by heart. Behind him, Crawford's cabin disappeared into the white void, taking with it Clara Whitmore's attempt at independence. Ahead lay Crystal Creek Ranch, and decisions he wasn't ready to face. For now, there was only the storm, the horse's steady movement, and the stranger in his arms who had dared to challenge Montana's winter alone. The medical kit's brass latches gleamed in the firelight as Silas opened it, revealing neat rows of bottles and bandages. Clara watched from her position on the settee, noting how his damaged hand moved with practiced precision despite its limitations. The kit itself was a doctor's case, she realized, expensive and comprehensive, another piece of the puzzle that was Silas Cade. "This will help with the pain." He measured liquid from a brown bottle, his movement suggesting long familiarity with the task. "Though I suspect you're well acquainted with laudanum. I avoided it after my accident." Clara accepted the glass but didn't drink. "Doctors said it would dull the pain. I said I preferred to know exactly what my limitations were." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps even respect. "Brave decision, practical one. Pain reminds us we're alive." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, understanding passed between them, the kind that came only from intimate knowledge of what it meant to rebuild oneself around permanent damage. The great room's massive fireplace cast dancing shadows across walls hung with maps and cattle brands. Everything spoke of careful planning, of a life arranged to accommodate its owner's needs, like her adaptations to the cabin, but on a grander scale. "Your housekeeper mentioned dinner at 7, Clara said, breaking the charged silence. "I should dress properly. Mrs. Graves will bring a tray here. You need rest. What I need, Mr. Cade, is to maintain what dignity remains to me." She gestured to her wrinkled traveling dress, now dried from the snow, but hardly suitable. "I may be a charity case, but I needn't look like one. You're not—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "There are clothes in the guest room. Mrs. Graves can assist you." "Thank you." Clara gripped her cane, prepared for the struggle to stand. Before she could rise, his hand appeared before her, the scarred one, offered without pretense or pity. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His grip was firm but careful, supporting without overwhelming. They managed the maneuver with minimal awkwardness, two people accustomed to working around their respective limitations. "The stairs will be difficult," he said, releasing her hand quickly. "I've managed worse." His mouth curved slightly. "Of that I have no doubt." The guest room proved to be larger than Crawford's entire cabin, its massive four-poster bed and heavy furniture suggesting Eastern luxury rather than frontier practicality. A trunk at the foot of the bed yielded several serviceable dresses, presumably left by some long-ago visitor. "My sisters," Silas said from the doorway, answering her unspoken question. "From before." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken history. Clara ran her fingers over a dark blue wool dress, noting its quality. "You have a large family." "Had." His tone discouraged further questions. "Mrs. Graves will help you dress. Dinner is in 1 hour." He left before she could respond, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Clara sank onto the bed, her leg aching from the day's ordeal. The laudanum remained untouched in its glass on the bedside table, but she was tempted. Everything about this place, about its owner, unsettled her carefully maintained equilibrium. Mrs. Graves arrived with hot water and a practical manner that Clara immediately appreciated. The older woman's efficiency helped disguise how much assistance Clara actually needed, preserving her pride while ensuring she'd be presentable for dinner. "The master hasn't taken meals in the dining room since he came west," Mrs. Graves mentioned, as she fastened the dress's buttons. "Not with company, at least." "I'm not company, I'm an obligation." "Mr. Cade doesn't believe in obligations." The housekeeper's tone was carefully neutral. "He doesn't believe in much of anything these days." The blue dress fit well enough, though Clara suspected Silas's sister had been taller, healthier, whole in ways Clara would never be again. In the mirror, she looked almost like her old self, if one ignored the cane, the slight twist to her posture, the shadows under her eyes. At precisely 7, she made her way downstairs, each step calculated and careful. Silas waited at the bottom, his own stance suggesting hidden pain. The storm still raged outside, but here in the warm glow of lamplight, they were two broken people attempting a normal evening. "You didn't take the laudanum," he observed, offering his arm for the walk to the dining room. "Neither did you," she countered, noting the stiffness in his movements. His laugh surprised them both, a rusty sound, as if long unused. "Shall we agree to respect each other's stubbornness and leave it at that? A practical compromise." Clara smiled despite herself. "Though I warn you, Mr. Cade, I'm not particularly good at being a proper guest." "Fortunate, then, that I'm not particularly good at being a proper host." They entered the dining room together, each supporting the other in ways too subtle for pride to protest. Outside, the storm howled its fury at being ignored, while inside, two survivors began the delicate process of learning to trust again. The Philadelphia Inquirer clipping had yellowed with age, pressed between the pages of a medical text Clara had found in the library. She hadn't meant to pry. She'd been searching for something to read during her enforced convalescence. But there was Silas's name in stark black print, and beneath it a story that explained everything about the man who had rescued her. "Prominent surgeon's career ends in tragedy," the headline declared. "Dr. Silas Cade, rising star of Philadelphia. Medical Society, permanently injured in heroic rescue attempt." Clara's fingers trembled as she read on. The article detailed how Dr. Cade had attempted to save a family from their burning carriage after a runaway horse accident. He'd managed to pull 3 children to safety before a collapse trapped his right hand, crushing it beyond repair. The final paragraph mentioned his engagement to Philadelphia socialite Miss Eleanor Winchester, and noted that the wedding had been indefinitely postponed. "Finding anything interesting?" Clara started at Silas's voice from the doorway. She hadn't heard him approach. He moved quietly despite his injuries, like a predator that had learned to adapt. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. It's public record." He crossed to the fireplace, his movements controlled but tense. "Though I'm surprised that particular piece of history followed me here. You saved those children. I ended my career." The words carried no self-pity, only fact. "A surgeon needs two good hands. I had already lost the woman I loved. She made it clear a crippled doctor wasn't what she'd agreed to marry. My profession was all I had left." Clara carefully refolded the article. "So you came west, where a man's worth is measured by what he can still do, not what he's lost." He turned to face her, firelight casting harsh shadows across his features. "As you well know—" "Yes." Clara touched her leg, understanding flowing between them. "Though I suspect you've done more with what remains than most do with everything intact." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, at being seen so clearly. "The ranch is impressive, but I meant your medical knowledge. You haven't lost that, even if you can't perform surgery." Silas moved to the window, his damaged hand flexing unconsciously. Outside, the storm had finally begun to ease, though drifts still blocked the roads. They'd been trapped together for 3 days now, learning each other's rhythms, adapting to each other's limitations. "I wanted to help people," he said finally. "To make a difference. After the accident, I couldn't see how that was possible anymore." Clara thought of Sarah Jane, of the girl's wistful desire to learn music. "Perhaps we both gave up too easily on finding new ways to use our gifts." He turned, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You still play? In your mind, at least?" "Every day. The music doesn't require perfect legs, only a perfect understanding of how it should sound." "And your teaching?" "Requires patience and knowledge, not physical prowess." She met his gaze steadily. "Just as medical knowledge doesn't require surgical precision to be valuable." Silas moved closer, close enough that Clara could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "You're a dangerous woman, Clara Whitmore, because—" "I speak the truth? Because you make me consider possibilities I'd rather ignore." He reached for the newspaper clipping, his scarred hand brushing hers. "The past is safer buried." "Is it? You've built an empire here, Mr. Cade, but you're as isolated as I was in that cabin. At least my prison was made of necessity, not choice." She'd gone too far. She saw it in the sudden rigidity of his posture, the withdrawal in his eyes. But before he could retreat behind his walls, Clara pressed on. "Thank you for showing me the article. It helps me understand." "Understanding is a dangerous thing, Mrs. Whitmore. So is refusing to heal." She levered herself up from the chair, balancing carefully. "But then, we're both rather stubborn about our choices, aren't we?" A reluctant smile touched his lips. "Apparently so." He offered his arm, a gesture that had become natural over the past days. "Dinner should be ready. Shall we continue this discussion over Mrs. Graves's excellent roast?" Clara accepted his support, noting how they'd learned to move together, compensating for each other's weaknesses. "Only if you're prepared to lose the argument." His laugh, still rare but becoming more frequent, warmed the space between them. "I'm beginning to suspect, Mrs. Whitmore, that losing to you might not be entirely unpleasant." They made their way to dinner, leaving the newspaper clipping behind. But its revelations lingered, like the first thaw of spring touching frozen ground, promising change, whether they welcomed it or not. The chess pieces were beautifully carved, each one shaped by patient hands during long winter nights. Clara ran her fingers over the white queen, feeling the subtle marks of knife work, the careful attention to detail. Like everything in Silas's home, they spoke of solitude transformed. "Into purpose, your move," Silas said from his chair opposite her. The library fire cast warm light across the chessboard between them, their nightly ritual during this week of enforced companionship. Outside, another storm raged, but here they had created a pocket of peace neither had expected to find. Clara moved her knight, watching Silas's face as he studied the board. She'd learned to read him during these quiet games, the slight tension around his eyes when he was in pain, but trying to hide it, the barely perceptible smile when she made a particularly clever move. "You carved these yourself?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The pieces showed the same precise care she'd seen him use with his medical kit. "During my first winter here," his scarred hand hovered over a bishop before choosing his rook instead. "Had to learn new ways to keep the hands busy, even the damaged one. They're exquisite." She captured one of his pawns, setting it carefully aside, like playing with small sculptures. "My father taught me chess," he said unexpectedly. "Said it built character, though I doubt he'd approve of me teaching a woman to play. And yet here you are, losing to one." Clara smiled as Silas's eyebrows rose. "Check, by the way." He studied the board, surprise turning to appreciation. "Clever trap. You've been planning that for several moves. I had an excellent teacher in Boston. He said chess wasn't about winning. It was about understanding how your opponent thinks." "And how do I think, Mrs. Whitmore?" The question carried weight beyond the game. Clara considered her answer carefully, methodically, protecting your key pieces. "But sometimes," she moved her queen, "sometimes you're so focused on defense that you miss opportunities for something more." Silas sat back, his dark eyes intent on her face. "Are we still discussing chess?" "Perhaps not." She met his gaze steadily. "You're not the only one who's built walls, Mr. Cade. Mine may be newer, but they're just as solid. Yet here you are. A challenging mine. Someone had to make the first move." He laughed softly, the sound no longer as rusty as it had been days ago. "Using my own chess lessons against me. Dangerous tactical thinking, Mrs. Whitmore." "Clara," she said impulsively, "after a week of shared meals and chess matches, surely we can dispense with formality." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, warmth, and perhaps a touch of fear. "Clara, then." He moved a piece almost absently. "Though you should know, letting you closer isn't wise. Wisdom is overrated." She captured his bishop. "I believe that's checkmate." Silas studied the board, then her face with equal intensity. "So it is. Well played. Another game?" "It's growing late." But he was already resetting the pieces, his damaged hand moving with practiced care among the carved figures. "Though I suppose there's nothing else to do with the storm." Clara hid her smile. They both knew the latest storm had passed hours ago, but neither seemed willing to acknowledge it, just as neither mentioned that she was now strong enough to return to her cabin or that the roads to town had cleared enough for travel. "Your sister's dresses," she said, as he completed the setup. "The ones I've been wearing. Tell me about her." She expected him to withdraw, as he usually did when family was mentioned. Instead, he touched one of the chess pieces, the White Queen, with unusual gentleness. "Catherine, she is the best of us. She used to read to me when I was sick as a child. Never lost patience, never complained. You miss her." "I miss who I was when she was part of my life." He moved his first pawn. "Your turn." Clara recognized the deflection, but accepted it. They were both learning to navigate these waters carefully, testing depths neither had expected to explore. Again, she moved her own pawn, beginning the intricate dance of their nightly game. The fire settled in the grate, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, wind whistled around the house's stone corners, while inside, two people who had forgotten, out of trust, slowly remembered the steps of that particular skill. "I should warn you," Silas said as their game progressed. "I've learned from my mistakes. You won't catch me in the same trap twice." Clara smiled, seeing the double meaning in his words. "Good," she said softly. "Neither will I." The carved pieces moved across the board like dancers, each move bringing their hands closer, each strategic retreat followed by a careful advance. Like the game itself, they were learning when to attack, when to defend, and when to risk everything for the chance of victory. Clara found the pressed flower between the pages of Silas's medical journal. A perfect prairie rose, its delicate pink petals preserved as if it had bloomed yesterday instead of years ago. The journal lay open on his desk where he'd been consulting. It to mix a salve for her leg, the dried bloom a startling touch of grace among pages of precise medical notations. "Catherine sent it," Silas said from the doorway, making her start. "Said I needed something beautiful in my exile, even if I was determined to be a hermit. It's lovely." Clara touched the dried petals gently. "Though I wouldn't have taken you. For a man who keeps flowers, I'm not. Usually." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "But it reminded me that beauty can survive in harsh places." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Through the study window, weak February sunshine glinted off snow that had begun to settle, no longer whipped into drifts by constant storms. "Your leg is improving," he observed, changing the subject. "The inflammation's nearly gone, thanks to your knowledge." Clara shifted her weight, testing the truth of his words. The constant ache had indeed subsided to a manageable throb. "Though I suspect the rest has helped more than the medicine. You need to build up your strength before—" He stopped abruptly. "Before I return to my cabin." She kept her voice neutral, though her heart quickened. "We both know I can't stay here forever." "No," he agreed too quickly. "Of course not." But he didn't move away, and Clara found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the silver threading his dark hair at the temples, the face of a man who had learned to hide his thoughts, now betraying subtle signs of internal struggle. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about what you said regarding medical knowledge, not requiring surgical precision. Have you? The town has no doctor. The nearest one is in Helena." Now he did step back, his expression closing. "I'm not—" "You're exactly what they need. What we need." She emphasized the "we" slightly. "You don't have to perform surgery to help people, Clara. And I've been corresponding with Sarah Jane's mother." She pressed on before he could protest. "She's reconsidering piano lessons, now that she knows I'm staying with you. Apparently your reputation lends me respectability I couldn't earn on my own." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "You're planning to stay in town, then?" "I'm planning to build something useful from what remains." She gestured to the medical journal, the preserved rose. "As someone once showed me was possible." Silas picked up the journal, his damaged hand careful with its fragile contents. "The townspeople are more afraid of illness than they are of my limp or your reclusiveness." She smiled slightly. "Fear is a powerful motivator for change. You've thought this through." "I've had time these past weeks." Clara watched him replace the rose with infinite care. "We both have." He turned to her then, something raw and honest in his expression. "I'm not good at connecting with people. Not anymore, I've noticed." She kept her tone gentle. "Fortunately, I'm not asking you to connect with people, just to help them. And perhaps—" She hesitated, then continued softly, "perhaps to stop pushing away those who've already connected." The grandfather clock in the hall struck noon, its deep chimes echoing through the house. Outside, an icicle dripped steadily from the eaves, the first real sign of thaw they'd seen this season. "I'll consider it," Silas said finally. Clara nodded, accepting this small victory. "That's all I ask." She moved toward the door, her gait smoother than it had been in weeks. At the threshold, she paused. The rose survived its journey west, bloomed again in its own way. Sometimes beauty isn't about being perfect, it's about enduring. She felt his eyes on her as she left, felt the weight of words unsaid, of possibilities neither had dared imagine weeks ago. The house no longer felt like a fortress of isolation, but rather a place where healing, of body, of heart, of soul, might actually be possible. Spring was coming, and with it perhaps new growth for them both. The telegraph's sharp yellow paper crackled in Clara's hands as she read the message again, each word landing like a stone in still water. "Aunt Adelaide, gravely ill, stop, requests your immediate return. Stop! We'll send train fare. Stop reply soonest. Stop. She stood in Silas's study, where the messenger had found her reviewing patient records, a task that had become routine in the past weeks. Outside, March winds urged the last patches of snow into reluctant retreat, while inside, the life she'd carefully constructed threatened to unravel. Bad news? Silas's voice came from behind her. He'd been checking his cattle in the south pasture, and his coat still carried the fresh scent of spring mud and prairie grass. My aunt. Clara handed him the telegram, watching his face as he read. The same aunt who offered to take me in after my accident. I refused her charity then, and now she's dying. Now she's trying to manage my life one last time. Clara moved to the window, her leg aching with the threat of rain. She never approved of my coming west. This is her final attempt to save me from my mistakes. Silas set the telegram on his desk, next to the ledger where they'd begun keeping joint records of their medical work. 3 families had already sought his help since Clara had spread word of his knowledge. Small things, a child's fever, a miner's infected hand, but each success pulled him further from isolation. Will you go? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Clara turned from the window to face him. Should I? That's not my decision to make, isn't it? She took a step toward him, noting how he tensed but didn't retreat. We've been dancing around this for weeks, Silas. What we're building here, it's not just a medical practice. Clara, I've watched you with your patients. You're coming back to life, same as me, same as that prairie rose Catherine sent you. It's not that simple. But he moved closer, drawn despite his protests. You have family, I have obligations there, yes, but I have something far more precious here. She gestured to the ledger, the neatly organized medical supplies, the chess set waiting for their evening game. I have purpose, partnership. Is that what we have? His voice roughened. Partnership? You know it's more. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Unless I'm misreading. His damaged hand caught hers, the twisted fingers gentle against her palm. You're not. God help me. You're not. The confession hung in the air between them, changing everything and nothing at once. Clara looked down at their joined hands, both marked by life's hardships, both still capable of tenderness. I should go to her, she said softly, but not to stay, not to return to being the poor crippled niece who needs looking after. You've never needed looking after. His free hand came up to touch her cheek. That's what terrifies me most about you, Clara Whitmore. You're the strongest person I've ever known. Strong enough to walk away from you, strong enough to come back. The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable as spring after winter. His lips were warm against hers, careful at first, then deepening as she responded. Clara's free hand found his shoulder, steadying herself as her bad leg trembled. His arm slipped around her waist, supporting her weight without comment or hesitation. When they parted, she saw the same wonder in his eyes that she felt, the discovery that broken pieces could fit together to make something whole and new. I'll wait, he said roughly. However long you need with your aunt, the practice, our practice, he amended. We'll be here. I'll be here. Clara touched his face, mapping the features she'd come to know so well. I'm not running. Away this time. No more than you're hiding away. No, he smiled slightly, though God knows you've made hiding impossible. The telegram lay forgotten on the desk as evening shadows lengthened across the study floor. Outside, meadowlarks called their spring songs, while inside, 2 people who had learned to live with silence discovered the joy of breaking it. Stay for dinner? Silas asked, still holding her close, always fishing for a chess partner. But Clara smiled, knowing they both heard the deeper question and answer beneath the casual words. I've grown accustomed to losing to you, liar. You let me win half those games. His laugh, free and genuine now, filled the study. Only half? They moved together toward the door, each compensating for the other's limitations with practiced ease. The telegram could wait until morning. Tonight, was for celebrating winter's end and the unexpected blooming of something both had thought forever lost. The seed packets spread across the kitchen table like promises. Tomatoes, peas, herbs for healing, flowers for beauty. Clara sorted them into neat rows, while Silas reviewed her sketched plans for the kitchen garden they'd plant behind the house. After she returned from Boston, "Lavender here," she indicated, her finger tracing the paper. "It's good for headaches and sleep troubles. Thyme and rosemary for respiratory problems. And here," she touched a larger section, "vegetables for Mrs. Graves to fuss over. You've thought of everything." Silas's good hand covered hers on the drawing. "Though you might be overestimating my farming abilities while you're gone, I trust Mrs. Graves to keep you from killing everything." Clara turned her hand to lace her fingers with his. "Besides, you're a quick study. Look how well you've adapted to having patience again." The morning sun streamed through windows that no longer bore the dust of isolation. In the weeks since their first kiss, the house had slowly transformed, as if reflecting its owner's emergence from self-imposed exile. Fresh curtains hung in the study, courtesy of Sarah Jane's mother, who now brought her daughter twice weekly for piano lessons. The surgery they'd begun calling the converted morning room that held organized supplies and a growing list of regular patients. "Speaking of patients," Silas said, "Matthew Harper's wife is expecting. She's worried about the breech position." "You'll handle it beautifully," Clara squeezed his hand. "You delivered Sarah Jane, didn't you? That was different. I had 2 good hands then. And now you have experience, knowledge, and an entire town's trust." She gestured to the seed packets. "Things grow where you plant them, Silas, even if the ground seems frozen at first." He lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "When did you become so wise?" "Probably around the time I nearly froze to death in Benjamin Crawford's cabin." She smiled at his wince. "Life has a way of teaching us what we need to know, if we're brave enough to learn." "How long?" The question held layers of meaning. How long would she be gone? How long until they could begin their shared life properly? How long had he waited to find someone who understood him so completely? 2 weeks to Boston by train. However long. Aunt Adelaide needs, then 2 weeks back. Clara kept her voice steady. A month, perhaps 6 weeks at most. And if she tries to keep you there, she won't succeed. Clara met his worried gaze. "I'm not the same woman who left Boston, Silas. That woman was running away. This one has something to run toward." He stood, drawing her up with him, careful of her leg on the uneven floorboards. Outside, spring rain fell in gentle curtains, and promising new growth. Inside, they held each other, learning the quiet language of trust and commitment. "I'll write to Catherine," Silas said into her hair. "Tell her about the changes here. About you." Clara leaned back to see his face, understanding the magnitude of this decision. "She'll come visit, you know, once she knows you're ready to be her brother again. As long as she doesn't expect me at any society functions. One miracle at a time," Clara smiled. "Though you handle our local society well enough now, Mrs. Henderson actually curtsied to you yesterday, only because she's terrified of contradicting. The town's only doctor. Our patients trust you because you see them as people, not just problems to solve." She touched his cheek. "The same way you saw me." Silas turned his face to kiss her palm. "You saw me first. Stubborn woman, refusing to let me hide behind my walls, says the man who rode out in a blizzard to save a stranger. Best mistake I ever made," Clara laughed. "I thought you weren't good at connecting with people." "I'm not." He pulled her closer. "But you're not people. You're Clara." The rain intensified, drumming on the roof like applause. On the table, the seed packets waited for planting. Mint for tea, marigolds for color, chamomile for calm. Each one a promise of roots to be put down, of beauty and healing growing together. "The train leaves tomorrow," Clara said softly. "I know." His arms tightened fractionally. "I'll drive you to the station. In the rain? In a monsoon, if necessary." He kissed her temple. "But tonight, we plan our garden." Clara turned back to the table, still within the circle of his arms. "And you can pretend you understand anything about crop rotation." His laugh rumbled against her back. "As my doctor orders." They bent together over the garden plans, while outside the rain washed winter's last traces from the awakening earth. Everything was changing, the season, the house, their hearts. But change, they had learned, could be as welcome as spring after the longest winter. The Cade family Bible lay open on Silas's desk, its pages yellow with age and memory. James Cade stood before it, his fashionable Boston suit out of place in the frontier study. "Mother insisted I bring it," he said, watching his older brother's face. "Said it was time it came home to you." Silas stared at the familiar volume, its cover worn smooth by generations of hands. The family record page showed births, deaths, marriages, including his own cancelled wedding, the ink scratched out violently by their father's hand. "You could have written that you were coming." Silas's damaged hand clenched unconsciously. "Would you have received me if I had?" James moved to the window, taking in the changes to the house, fresh curtains, new medical supplies, signs of life. Returning, "Catherine said you'd written about changes, about someone named Clara. Clara's in Boston." The words came out sharper than intended. "Visiting family, so we've missed each other." James turned, and Silas saw their father in his straight spine, their mother in his careful diplomat smile. Though the town can't stop talking about her. The crippled piano teacher who melted the ice around Crystal Creek Ranch. "Don't call her that." "No offense meant." James held up his hands in peace. "I'm glad, Silas. We've all been worried. 10 years of worry, and you choose now to show it? 10 years of letters you never answered. 10 years of holidays you missed. 10 years of mother asking if this was the year you'd come home." Silas moved to his desk, his fingers finding Clara's latest letter beneath the Bible. Her words grounded. "Him, the garden will be waiting, my love, as will I." "I have patience," he said finally. "The Harper baby's due any day." "You're practicing again?" Surprise colored James's voice. "But your hand, there's more to medicine than surgery." The words came easily now, Clara's influence evident in their confidence. "I can't operate, but I can heal." James studied him with new eyes. "She must be remarkable, this Clara of yours." "She is." Silas touched the Bible's worn cover. "She understands. About damages, about building new lives from what remains, like your garden." James gestured to the window, where neat rows of spring plantings showed Clara's influence. "Catherine mentioned you're growing herbs now. Healing plants. Clara's design. She'll finish planting it when—" Silas stopped. The word "when" suddenly, precarious in his mouth. "When she returns." James's voice gentled. "She will return, Silas. Not everyone leaves." The brothers stood in awkward silence, a decade of distance between them. Through the window, Silas could see Mrs. Graves directing the stable boy in weeding the kitchen garden. Everything about his life now bore Clara's touch. The house's renewed warmth, the steady stream of patience, even this moment with his brother. "Stay." "And for dinner," Silas said abruptly. "Mrs. Graves always cooks too much anyway." James's smile came slowly, genuine this time. "I'd like that, though," he hesitated. "I should tell you, I'm not just here about Mother's health. Father's retiring. From the medical board, he hopes." "No." Silas's voice was firm. "My life is here now, my practice, my home, your Clara, everything." Silas met his brother's gaze. "I can't be who I was, James, but I'm becoming someone new. Someone who might even be better." James touched the family Bible, his fingers tracing the embossed letters. "Perhaps that's what Father needs to see. Not the son who left, but the man you've become." A knock interrupted them. Matthews, announcing that Mary Harper's labor had begun. Silas grabbed his medical bag, the movements automatic now, even with his damaged hand. "Come with me," he said to James. "See what kind of doctor I am now." Hours later, with a healthy baby girl sleeping in her mother's arms, the brothers sat on Silas's porch. The spring evening was mild, scented with Clara's newly planted lavender. "You're good with them," James said. The townspeople, the patients. I never thought, neither did I. Silas smiled slightly. Clara says we all deserve second chances, even prodigal brothers and prodigal sons. Silas thought of the family Bible, of Clara's gentle insistence that healing came in many forms. Perhaps, though on my own terms, I'll tell them. James stood, brushing off his city clothes. About your practice, your life here. Let them understand what you've built. Tell Mother. Silas paused. Tell her Clara and I will visit when we're ready. The brothers parted with an awkward embrace. 10 years of silence, beginning to thaw like winter ice in spring sun. Later, alone in his study, Silas opened the family Bible to its record page. Below his scratched-out past, he wrote with steady purpose, Clara Whitmore, beloved wife-to-be. Some damages he was learning made way for unexpected grace. The legal document bore the letterhead of Preston and Shaw, attorneys at law, its Boston address as proper and imposing as Aunt Adelaide herself. Clara's hands shook as she read it in the privacy of her aunt's library, the carefully worded paragraphs, revealing the trap she'd walked into, in consideration of your physical limitations and unmarried status. Substantial trust to be administered, conditional upon your permanent residence in Boston, for your own protection and security. The words blurred before her eyes. 6 weeks of tending her aunt's illness, which had proven to be more loneliness than infirmity, had led to this moment. A golden cage, constructed with lawyer's precision and familial manipulation. It's quite generous, dear. Aunt Adelaide's voice came from the doorway, satisfied and certain. The house on Beacon Street, an adequate income, proper society, everything. You've lost, since your accident, everything I never wanted. Clara set the document down carefully. You weren't really ill, were you? I was concerned. Her aunt swept into the room, silk skirts rustling with authority. Living alone in that savage territory, associating with a disgraced doctor. Silas is not disgraced. Clara's voice could have frozen summer wine. He's respected, needed. We both are. A crippled piano teacher and a one-handed physician. Adelaide's laugh held no humor. My dear, you're living in a fantasy. That's why I've taken steps. What steps? Something cold settled in Clara's stomach. I've written to the territorial governor, explained about your condition, about how you were taken advantage of in your vulnerable state. There will be an investigation into this Dr. Cade's medical practice. The grandfather clock ticked heavily in the corner, marking seconds that stretched like years. Clara thought of Silas treating Mary Harper's baby, of Sarah Jane mastering her scales, of the garden waiting to bloom under Montana's spring sun. Why? She forced the word past her tight throat. Because I love you. Adelaide moved closer, her familiar lavender scent suddenly cloying. Because I promised your mother I'd take care of you. This trust will secure your future. My future? Clara stood, her cane planted firmly. You mean my imprisonment? Tell me, Aunt, does the trust specify which wheelchair I should use? Which corner I should sit in while proper society pretends I don't exist? Don't be dramatic. I'm being practical. Clara picked up the document. You want to take care of me? Here's the truth. I haven't needed laudanum for pain in months. I'm teaching music again, helping run a medical practice. I'm respected for my abilities, not pitied for my limitations. A medical practice? Adelaide's voice dripped disbelief. In some frontier town? Where people care more about healing than appearances. Clara's fingers found the edge of Silas's latest letter in her pocket. Where a doctor's worth isn't measured by his hands, but by his heart. You can't possibly prefer that life to this. Adelaide gestured to the library's refined elegance. What of security, position, the life you were born to? I was born to live, Aunt Adelaide, not to exist as an ornament in your household. And this doctor, this Silas Cade, he encourages these foolish notions. Clara smiled, thinking of chess games and garden plans, of shared patience and shared dreams. He encourages me to be exactly who I am, and I do the same for him. You're in love with him. It wasn't a question. Yes, the simple truth felt like freedom. And he loves me, scars, limitations, and all. Adelaide sank into her armchair, decades of social certainty crumbling. The trust, the arrangements, keep them. Clara pulled Silas's letter from her pocket, drawing strength from the familiar handwriting. I have all the security I need. In Montana, Clara, I'm leaving on tomorrow's train. She moved to the door, each step deliberate and sure. I'll write when I'm home. And you're welcome to visit, though I warn you, we're building a hospital wing. You might have to get your hands dirty. The governor can investigate all he likes. He'll find a needed doctor serving his territory and a music teacher helping children find beauty in the wilderness. Clara paused in the doorway. You taught me once that a lady always knows her own worth. Thank you for that lesson, Aunt Adelaide. I know mine now. She left the library, her cane tapping a steady rhythm on polished floors. Behind her, the legal document lay forgotten on the desk, its offered chains no match for the bonds of love and purpose that drew her westward. In her room, Clara began to pack, her movements sure and swift. Spring was advancing in Montana. She had a garden to plant, a practice to build, a life to live, and a heart to come home to. The ring caught the late afternoon light as Silas turned it in his fingers, his grandmother's wedding band, sent by Catherine. After his letter announcing Clara's return, simple gold, worn smooth by generations of love and trust. He'd been carrying it for 3 days, waiting for Clara's stage from the railroad station. The sound of wheels on the drive sent him to the window. Through newly washed panes, he watched the stage appear around the bend, spring mud splashing its sides. His damaged hand clenched, the now familiar ache grounding him in the moment. Clara emerged from the stage like sunshine breaking through clouds. Even at this distance, he saw how she'd changed. Her posture straighter, her movements more assured. She paid the driver with a quiet dignity that spoke of battles fought and won. He met her at the door, suddenly uncertain, despite the ring in his pocket. Welcome home, home, she repeated softly, reaching up to touch his face. You've lost weight. Mrs. Graves says I'm impossible to cook for when I'm worried. And were you? Worried. Instead of answering, he kissed her, feeling her smile against his lips. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. The governor's office sent an investigator last week. Aunt Adelaide works quickly. Clara's hands tightened on his arms. I'm sorry, I should have warned you. Shh. He drew her inside, where afternoon sun painted the foyer in amber light. You'll be pleased to know that Dr. Morrison found our practice remarkably well organized and our patient care exemplary. He's recommending the territory officially recognize us as a proper medical facility. Clara's laugh held tears and triumph. Really? Apparently, a doctor who knows his limitations and works within them is preferable to no doctor at all. He smiled slightly, though he did suggest we need a proper nurse. I might know someone. Sarah Jane's older sister trained at Boston General. They moved together to the study, where signs of Clara's influence remained even in her absence. Fresh flowers on the desk, medical texts arranged for easy reference, the chess set waiting for their evening game. Through the window, the garden showed new growth, tender shoots reaching for spring sun. I missed you, Clara said simply. Every proper parlor, every pitying glance. I missed this. Us. Silas drew the ring from his pocket, its gold warm from his hand. Marry me. Clara went still. Silas. Not out of fear or defiance or because your aunt wants to lock you away. The words rushed out, practiced over sleepless nights. Marry me because we're stronger together, because we see each other truly, because I love you, Clara Whitmore, broken pieces and all. She took the ring, turning it to catch the light. Your grandmother's? Catherine sent it, along with her blessing and a promise to help with the wedding. Your family needs to accept my choices. Starting with you. He covered her hands with his. If you'll have me, Clara smiled through tears. I decided to have you the moment You rode through that blizzard, you impossible man. She pressed the ring back into his palm. Ask me properly. Silas went down on one knee, ignoring the protest from old injuries. Clara Whitmore, will you marry me? Build this life with me? Grow old and stubborn with me? Yes. She tugged him up, mindful of his balance. Though I think we've proven we're already stubborn enough. The ring slid onto her finger, as if it had waited a century for this moment. Outside, a meadowlark trilled its evening song, while inside, two hearts found their perfect rhythm. I should warn you, Clara said as Silas drew her close. I've invited Aunt Adelaide to the wedding. Brave of you. She'll either come and see what we've built, or stay away and admit she's wrong. Either way, we win. Silas laughed, the sound free and unguarded. My practical love. Speaking of practical, Clara's eyes held mischief. Doctor, Morrison's report mentioned our need for expanded facilities. I may have some ideas about that trust money Aunt Adelaide offered. Clara, if she wants to secure my future, she can invest in our hospital wing. Clara's smile held the quiet confidence he'd fallen in love with. On our terms, Silas kissed her again, marveling at how this woman had transformed his life. Have I mentioned that I love the way your mind works? Show me the patient records from while I was gone. Clara moved toward the desk, her limping gait as much a part of her grace as her brilliant smile. Then chess. I need to make sure you haven't been practicing without me. Never. Silas watched her settle into what had become her chair, knowing with bone-deep certainty that this was what healing truly meant. Not the absence of scars, but the presence of love strong enough to make them beautiful. The deed to Crystal Creek Ranch lay open on the study desk, its boundaries now expanded to include the 10 acres where their new hospital wing was rising. Beside it sat Aunt Adelaide's bank draft, her wedding gift and tacit blessing combined. In one substantial sum, Clara traced the property lines with her finger, while Silas reviewed the construction plans. The south-facing windows will give patients the best light, she noted, and being close to the garden means easy access to fresh herbs. Speaking of the garden, Silas looked out at their expanding medicinal plot, where Sarah Jane's sister Jenny, newly arrived from Boston General Hospital, was teaching a group of local girls about healing plants. Your aunt's letter mentioned she's considering a visit. This summer, once the hospital wing is finished. Clara smiled at his raised eyebrow. She claims it's to ensure her investment is properly managed, but I suspect she's curious about the life we've built. Through the open window came the sound of hammer strikes and saw blades, the music of growth and change. The hospital wing had begun as a dream sketched on paper during their winter evenings. Now, like everything else they'd planted together, it was blooming into reality. James writes that father's intrigued by our combination of traditional and herbal medicine. Silas moved behind Clara, his hands settling on her shoulders. Apparently, several of his colleagues are studying similar approaches. Having the great Dr. Theodore Cade's interest won't hurt when we apply for official recognition. Clara leaned back against him. Though I notice he still hasn't responded to our wedding invitation. He will. Silas's voice held new confidence. Catherine's handling him. She says he spends hours studying the patient reports we've sent. Like father, like son. Clara turned to face him, always needing proof before accepting change. The afternoon, sun caught her wedding ring, sending golden light dancing across the deed's formal script. 6 months had passed since their engagement, each day bringing new challenges and triumphs. The town that had once shunned them now sent its children to Clara for music lessons and its sick to Silas for healing. A knock at the study door preceded Jenny's entrance. Dr. Mrs. Cade, Mary Harper's here with the baby, just for a checkup. But she brought those quilting patterns Mrs. Cade asked about. Clara exchanged a knowing look with Silas. Every medical visit these days seemed to include some social element, as if the townspeople were making up for their earlier coldness with determined inclusion. Send her up, Silas said. Clara can discuss. Quilting while I examine little Rose. And then chess? Clara called as he headed for the surgery. "Only if you're prepared to lose, my love." Their laughter mingled as they parted to their separate tasks. Through the window, Clara watched Jenny return to her herb lesson, the young nurse's presence a bridge between Boston medicine and frontier practicality. Sarah Jane sat among the students, her fingers stained green from crushing herbs, her future taking shape in ways her parents had never imagined. Mary Harper's arrival with baby Rose created the usual stir of activity. While Silas conducted his examination, Clara and Mary bent over quilt patterns, their conversation moving easily between domestic arts and medical matters. The quilting circle that met weekly at Crystal Creek Ranch had become an unofficial community center, where women freely discussed their health concerns under the guise of sharing patterns. "We're thinking of naming her for you," Mary said suddenly, nodding toward her sleeping infant. "Rose Clara Harper, since you both helped bring her into the world." Clara blinked back unexpected tears. "Mary, the whole town's different now." Mary's work-worn hands smoothed the quilt pattern. "Having a proper doctor, music for our children, a hospital being built. You and Dr. Cade have given us more than medicine." Through the surgery door came Silas's warm laugh, followed by Rose's happy gurgle. Clara thought of the deed on the desk, of boundaries expanded to embrace a growing dream, of an aunt learning to accept new definitions of security, and a father-in-law beginning to understand different ways of healing. "We've been given more than we've given," Clara said softly. "A chance to be useful, to be whole." Later, after Mary and Rose had left and the sun was setting behind the mountains, Clara and Silas stood in their garden. The hospital wing's foundation stretched toward the western sky, while all around them herbs and flowers reached toward heaven. "Happy?" Silas asked, his arm warm around her waist. Clara leaned into him, feeling the steady strength they'd built together. "Complete," she corrected. "Though I warn you, I'm still going to win at chess tonight." His kiss tasted of laughter and promise. Around them, Crystal Creek Ranch stretched in all directions, its boundaries now marked not by isolation, but by healing, growth, and love's endless possibility. The piano's arrival caused quite a stir at the Crystal Creek Ranch. It took 6 men to maneuver the instrument into the hospital wing's new recreation room, its polished mahogany surface reflecting autumn sunlight through tall windows. Clara stood in the doorway, watching as Silas supervised the placement, her heart full at the sight of her wedding gift from Catherine finally finding its home. "Perfect," she said, as the last adjustments were made. "The patients will hear music while they heal, and Sarah Jane can stop practicing on that wheezy harmonium." Silas dismissed the workers with thanks and generous payment. When they were alone, he turned to Clara. "Will you play?" She moved to the bench, her cane tapping softly on the pine floors. Her leg had long since ceased to be the first thing people noticed about her, just as Silas's scarred hand was now seen less often than his healing touch. They had learned to move through the world with their limitations, finding grace in acceptance and strength in partnership. The first notes of Chopin filled the room, the same nocturne she'd tried to teach in those early days when the town had turned its back. Now the music floated through open windows, across gardens where healing herbs grew in neat rows, past the new hospital wing where Jenny trained local girls in nursing arts. Silas leaned against the piano, watching her fingers dance across the keys. "I've had a letter from Father," he said during a quiet passage. "He's retiring from the medical board next month, wants to see our work firsthand." Clara smiled without missing a note. "And your mother?" "Already planning what to plant in the spring garden with Mrs. Graves." The music swelled, joyful, and sure. Through the windows, they could see the town spreading below their hill, no longer remote and suspicious, but a community growing around the heart they'd helped create. Aunt Adelaide's investment had expanded into a proper medical center, while Clara's music students performed regularly in the recreation room, filling the ward with healing harmonies. "Do you miss Boston?" Silas asked as the piece ended. "About as much as you miss Philadelphia." Clara patted the bench beside her. "Though I'm glad we visited. Your father's face when he saw you deliver the Henderson twins." "Pride," Silas said, quietly. "I finally recognized it after all these years. The same pride I feel watching you with your students." She began another piece, this one composed during their courtship, a melody of winter storms and chess games, of shared patience and growing trust. "We've built something remarkable here. We've built a life." Silas touched her wedding ring, then the piano's gleaming surface. "Everything we thought we'd lost transformed into something new." Through the open door came the sound of Sarah Jane greeting new patients, her confidence grown with her responsibilities. Jenny's voice followed, discussing treatment plans with authority earned through study and practice. The hospital wing hummed with purposeful activity, exactly as they'd dreamed during those long winter evenings. Speaking of new things, Clara's fingers stilled on the keys. Dr. Morrison's letter arrived today. "The territories approved our application for a teaching hospital. We can start training frontier doctors next spring." Silas's smile held all the warmth that had once been frozen. "You knew they would." "I believed," she resumed, playing, softer now, "the same way I believed in us." He kissed her temple, careful not to disturb her playing. Around them, Crystal Creek Ranch had become more than a medical center. It was a place of second chances, where broken things were made whole in unexpected ways. The music rose and fell like prairie wind, like seasons changing, like love growing. Stronger through adversity, Clara's fingers found the final chords just as sunset painted the room in amber light. In that golden moment, she felt the perfect rightness of their shared path, two wounded healers who had found in each other the courage to trust, to grow, to love again. "Chess?" Silas offered his hand to help her rise. Clara accepted both his support and his challenge, as she had accepted everything about him, scars, strength, and all the possibility between. "Only if you're prepared to lose gracefully, my love." Their laughter echoed through the hospital wing, a different kind of healing music as perfect as any ever played on their piano of second chances.